Okay, so let me start by introducing the people who will help you through this town hall today. The first one in the dark, and I can't see her anymore. I think that's her. Michelle is, yeah, she's waving, I think, is the PC chair for 2022 and 2023. Mika, who is now the PC chair for 2023 and 2024, unfortunately cannot attend to a personal obligation. And we have Bailey Kachmar here in the audience, who is Artifacts chair. Is that true from 2021 to 2023? 3 years? Did we get you that long? Half of 2021, okay. We see, we probably will be 2024, right? So we'll see. And I'm Florian Kirschbaum. I'm the PC chair since last year and this year. So this PETS Town Hall is a little bit your opportunity to help shape this conference. I'm very happy to see many people of the PET board here, which govern this conference. And I can start with this slide right away. So the PET board, yeah, there it is. The PET board is the governing body for the PET conference and the PETS journal, the proceedings of PETS. You can see its composition on this website. It invites the program chairs and the general chairs, which usually provide a nice proposal, as Dali has done here for Wonderful Sydney. And we are actually looking for proposals for 2024. So if you are interested, approach me or somebody else you trust from the board. Together, the program chairs and the general chairs organize the conference, including paper selection by the program committee and chaired by the program chairs, and the logistics of all of these things that go into this event in the case for the conference. And then they'll join the PET board, I don't think. The PET board has terms of reference, but you will, if you ever become program chair or general chair, you will see. And the idea is here for the PET board to get a little bit of feedback from the audience, from the people who actually make up the conference, and see what it did. So I want to start with a little bit of an updated slide that was presented by me at the last town hall in 2021 when I was entering my second year of PC chairing. And I said in 2022, we're going to have a few changes. One was the introduction of the senior program committee. Another one was the review feedback process. And an ethics process, which was introduced for issue 2 and strongly led by Michelle, and she's going to talk about that more. And the self-publishing process sort of came upon us. It was not announced, but it sort of happened, and Michelle and I thought we should talk a little bit about that too. The increase in papers were so that Michelle and I thought we don't necessarily need an increase in the program committee, as was necessary in 2021, when the number of papers jumped very much for issue 3. I have a suspicion why that is the case, but I don't have any data, and it's still increased by 25%, but more on a steady rate. All right, so let's jump into the individual changes and start with the senior program committee. So the senior program committee is a selection of senior members of the community who write meta reviews and lead the discussion for the papers in the program committee. So their task is, in my opinion, and I'm not sure if I always communicated that very well, is to basically try to understand the arguments of the reviewers and try to make sense of that and come to a recommendation for the PC chairs and lead a discussion in that process with the reviewers and write a meta review as a summary for the authors. This was a new thing that we introduced in 2022, a little bit also due to the fact that I think Aaron and I in the end had 150 papers already in one issue, and we had issues this year where we had even more than that. Then leading the discussion on 75 papers is decreasing quality. And one of the thoughts was, I mean, PETS, if you talk to reviewers, one of the things that people like about PETS is that it has an excellent review process, right? So the review process is really what sets PETS apart, and the intention was to maintain the quality, and one step was here the program committee. So when we invited program committee members in 2022, pretty much everybody we asked said yes. And we estimated it a bit too large. We estimated a few people will say no, but pretty much no one did. What I heard from Michelle and Mika in 2023, a lot of people said no. So it is apparently more work for senior members of the community than was anticipated. So that is maybe something that sticks out. The other thing is that when managing the process, very subjective. So no blaming or no. We had very different styles between senior PC members, and some came to us later on at the end and asked, like, what was I supposed to do? And we really didn't have the perfect answer as well. We said, like, okay, this is sort of the things we would have expected, but it was a little bit of a difficult process for us in some cases to manage this. In others, other people did fantastic jobs, right? I mean, actually a large part of people did fantastic jobs and really helped the process. But we need to, I think, establish and define this role of a senior PC member more clearly, right? In the database community where this is more common, this is a well-established thing. But in the security community, okay, now CCS starts with area chairs, but they still have like over 100 paper to deal with, which is simply too much, right? You can only deal, in my opinion, at most with 10 papers, and then one is the actual one that causes you a problem and that consumes enough of your time if you want to do a really good job. So let's see how this evolves. It stayed in 2023, and if anybody has any opinion on that, we are happy to hear that. Anybody of the PC or anybody outside that got a meta review and has an opinion about that? Okay. If not, let me move on to the second part. So in the 2020 PETS Town Hall, somebody made a suggestion. We would really like to have some feedback process on the reviews. And I thought this could be an interesting experiment, how one could set up a system like that of sort of evaluating reviews, right? Because all of us, including myself, I'm constantly complaining about the reviews I'm getting. But I'm probably not getting any worse reviews than anybody else. We wanted to see how one could do something like this. So the intention was not so much to actually implement an evaluation of the reviews, but more to see whether or not or how such a system could be constructed. And we asked feedback from authors, from the reviewers, so the external reviewers and the regular PC, and the senior PC members. And the questions were similar, but sometimes slightly different, particularly in question 5, and I will get to that. And it was basically very simply collected in a Google form. And it was very quantitative, very simple. It shouldn't take long for you to complete to do something like that. We got only 1,600, about almost 1,700 reviews of reviews. That is less than we had reviews. So participation was kind of low. If you consider that you have an author, probably 3 fellow reviewers, and a senior PC member who should be able to give feedback, we should have, at 2,000 reviews, in the worst case, we should have almost 8,000 reviews of reviews. So we had a relatively low participation rate. And this is a little bit a problem with the databases, the sparseness of the data with the conclusions we can draw. But still, I believe that there is some interesting things in the data. We asked 5 questions, and I will read them the way an author would understand them is, did the reviewer even get what you were doing in the paper? Did he even understand what you were doing? Was he nice while he told you the paper is not right? Did he change his opinion after you told him he's not right? And the third one is, in the end, did you get something out of it? Was this a good review? Is this something you would write? And usefulness, this is where it was different. So regular PC, we didn't ask the question at all. For authors, we asked, was it useful to you? Did you learn something from the review? And for the senior PC, and I think this was a very important question for them, it was like, how important was this in making your recommendation in the end, this review? How much importance did you place on this specific review? So these 5 questions we asked, you could rate them on a scale of 1 to 5 for all the reviews that you did. As I said, the intention of this was how could a review process look like? Who should we ask? And does it have is there anything we can discern? Can we actually identify bad reviews or bad reviewers? And we promised to the PC members at the beginning that we will not reveal these individual statistics except to them if they request it from us. So I have 3 data points that I want to present, and the first one is the quality score. Remember the 5 questions, the question about quality, is this a good review, which was asked to all 3 respondent types. And we broke it down by acceptance type. So on the left side, you see the accepted papers. On the middle one is the major revision papers, and on the right one is the rejected papers. And we have in blue the authors, in orange the senior PC, and in gray the reviewers and the PC members, the regular PC members that rated their fellow reviewers. So fundamentally, you can see this, the average score. Actually, it's a little bit misleading. So the senior PC members have an actual higher average score for reviews for rejected papers, slightly higher than for accepted papers. In the reviewer case, it's slightly lower, but there is essentially no difference depending on what the decision type is. However, and it's a little bit biased so that you can see it, but there is clearly a bias from the authors towards rating reviews for papers that got rejected more negatively. Okay. So. Yes, for sure. Yes, for sure. It is. So a couple of things. Yes. The point is, however, the point is that if you want to take their feedback into account, you have to somehow account for that bias. Right? And I have in my third slide, I have a summary of the average scores per reviewer that had sufficiently many reviews. I just left authors out because I said I have no way of correcting this bias. Right? If somebody got unlucky and had a whole bunch of papers that were just had to be rejected for one reason or the other, he would get a bad rating and maybe not deserve it. Yes, so basically we need some way of dealing with this. The other thing I wanted to say, actually NeurIPS is implementing a very similar experiment to this one this year, where they want to see whether or not the ratings, the scoring from different audiences is reliable. The second one is also a very interesting slide, and it shows the average score per question. Now, in this case, the authors include accepted and rejected papers, so therefore their scores are lower, right? But if I take out the rejected, if I only look at accepted papers, the authors would be on almost the same level as senior PC and reviewer for all of the questions, except for the rebuttal. Did the reviewer take the rebuttal into account? So here, clearly, we seem to have an issue, that rebuttals are not sufficiently taken into account. The interesting thing, however, is the ones that see this, deficiency the most is the senior PC members who have the most opportunity to do something about it, at least somewhat, right? They can remind the reviewers, please, you haven't responded, please do something. And they can escalate it to the PC chairs. Yeah. So again, this goes a little bit back to the first slide on senior PC. Maybe there is something we need to do in refining that role so that that middle orange bar goes up a little bit, and overall people respond better to the rebuttals. And the third and last thing I wanted to present is the scores per reviewer. These are only people who have a sufficient number, I think in this case, at least three feedbacks to their reviews. And you can pretty much see that a very large number of reviewers is doing a good to excellent job. Yeah? In the eyes of only the senior PC and their fellow reviewers. So really a very large number of reviewers is doing really, really well, and fundamentally also their colleagues, not the people who submit papers, but their colleagues believe that it works in the system like that. However, there are very few in this long tail. We should think about doing something about this, right? So there are a few people who have received scores which are concerning, but it's not many. So if I were to design a review of review system and how to do that, then again, my 3 recommendations would be, we need to see whether or not, if we want to include the authors, we need to see that we count for the bias against rejected papers. We need to think about how we can use those results, how we can make it publicize them, how we can enforce them, and other things that have not been done in this study to its full extent. And the other one is you actually want system support. So this Google kind of form system in the long run, I don't think this is going to fly. This is my biggest concern why I wouldn't push for it anymore. It had to be integrated in something like HotCrab, which is a huge amount of work, right? So if HotCrab ever does it, then this would be a great thing. Yes, I give you the microphone.
So HotCrab does have a feature that allows you to rate reviews, but it's pretty minimal. I don't know if there's any way to, make use of that.
That's a good point. Thank you. Indeed, there is. However, it's really difficult to collect these statistics, right, over all of the reviewers. To enforce that this feedback is given, right? It's always voluntarily. You cannot not do it, and you have only a binary. You have good review, bad review. I think the full version by now has a little bit other things like long review to short review and other things. But it is not as rigorous as I would think a system like that would have to be. And Aaron and I at the beginning and talked long about this because in 2021 we didn't give a review award, right? And the system is just, it's just too brittle, right? In the same way that not many people participated in this one, like 20%, right? Not enough people participate, even less people participate in the in the hot crab system. Okay. Thanks, Tariq. So the question is, what if the response to the rebuttal is, oh, it doesn't change my mind? And that's a good question. One thing that we could think about is just putting one or two sentences in the response to the rebuttal and say like, thank you very much for your response, but I don't think my major concerns are addressed. Yeah, and I believe that would already be a feedback to the authors, and the PC members, senior PC members would know that. But again, of course, we need to see how we handle that process.
For the what to do about the small fraction of bad reviewers, I mean, presumably you stop assigning them papers and you don't invite them back. I mean, that's the traditional approach. Were you thinking something more than this?
No, not yet. So yes, that is also Michelle's point, right? Very often, as I think also Tariq meant this comment that the review was read but didn't change your mind. It's only made in the comments and not in the rebuttal. It's in the rebuttal itself, in the review itself, not the rebuttal, the review itself, and that is maybe something we can think about improving. Yes, you can always speak in, right? And you have light again. Okay. So indeed, the question, and Aaron pointed it out early on, is the question was the rebuttal taken into account is ambiguous, either if there is no rebuttal or if the rebuttal was taken into account in the discussion and not in the review. And yes, Paul tried to address this in his meta reviews. Okay. Oh yeah, right.
So quick question about accounting for the bias of authors. Clearly there's this correlation between results and score. Did you try any very simple, just compute the average score for rejected papers and then see if the score was, above or below that threshold? And if so, does that correlate with the plot you showed for I guess reviewer quality as ranked by other peers?
So we did not look. Wait. No, I'm not sure I got the question.
So I guess one very simple way to normalize would just be to compare. Right, if I rate my my reviews, compare that to the average score for an accepted or major revision or rejected paper, and then kind of like renormalize, determine whether that's a good score or a bad score.
No, we did not. We did not normalize the ratings of the raters, and that is because we have, particular for authors, we haven't taken them into account in this last graph. In this graph here, right? In this graph, authors are not.
Right. Yeah, I was just curious if one were to try to normalize it, does it correlate roughly with this plot, or would I get a completely different
We can't normalize. That is the other point I want to make, because we have only very few feedback from the authors, right? So many people only submitted one paper once to PETS and then provided feedback. How am I supposed to normalize them against everybody else? I don't think this is a fair, nevertheless, this is a fair normalization, right? So it is not such, normalizing the raters is definitely something one cannot try, but one needs larger data sets than we have, in my opinion. All right, there's one more question behind you. Thank you.
So I had a short comment about bad reviews. So it was already stated earlier that when PC members or senior PC members write bad reviews, then the way to cope with that is maybe assign less reviews to such people, or maybe even exclude them. So I also just wanted to mention that there is another side to that, I think, because if we exclude people who we believe didn't do enough effort for reviewing, then we end up giving more reviewing work to those who do a good job. And then good reviewers get more work, and then they get overworked. They start writing worse reviews. So there's a bit of this bias there, and I'm wondering maybe there's another way to improve quality of reviews apart from excluding people who don't do enough effort, because this way we kind of put a huge bulk of work on people who already do a good job. So I was just wanted to bring that in.
That is certainly true. That is certainly true. The load will be always carried. Good work always means more work. This is what I tell all of my students. Bailey knows. However, on the other side, the system in the way it currently works is that once you got the email that you're in the PC, you basically put that on your CV. You have the recognition, you have the fame, so to speak, and you don't have to do anything else anymore. Yeah? So the system right now works that both the ones that actually do the work, and they do the work whether or not we exclude the other ones or not, or the ones that don't do any work, they both get the same recognition. And I think that is somewhere, that is where we need to put the level on, because the people who do good work should get more recognition. And if we then have a self-enforcing cycle that we do all of the people who do good work get more recognition, and we keep the other ones sort of out, then this can maybe work.
Yes, I see. I was just thinking also from the other side, when somebody who the chairs believe didn't do a good enough job, when right now these people are just silently dropped from further consideration. So I don't think necessarily it needs to be externally acknowledged that the part of the PC did a good job and the part didn't. But if there is some commonly accepted, not mean way to communicate that, unfortunately, participation, which is really hard because this is, of course, voluntary service. So yeah, I just think there can be a wider discussion there, but I know that's a complicated question, of course.
Yes, yes. I mean, it comes back to the question of how do we enforce a system like that. So in this case, what we did, Michelle and I, is we took a large portion of the PC. This is about 30% of the regular PC and 30% of the senior PC. And these are people who have done an excellent job, not just a good job, not just a very good job, but an excellent job. If your name is not on there, doesn't mean that you have done a bad job. Okay? I want to make that very clear, because simply we don't have enough data to really reliably say that somebody did a bad job. So therefore, we erred on the side of really rewarding only people where we know that they definitely did an excellent job. It's extremely hard for the externals because they need a sufficient number of reviews in order to get into that list. Therefore, there is only so few, but many of them do an excellent job. They just don't get enough feedback in order to be in that list. For them, it's the hardest to get in there. For a regular PC, it's hard because they have to ultimately reject the papers. And for senior PC, it's a little easier, but not easy. Because they only need to summarize, only need to summarize the opinions of the reviewers. But these are the people from, again, I don't want to reveal how we exactly the math behind this, but we are sure that all of these people did an excellent job. And we want to put that on the webpage, and we want to make that aware, and want to give it a nice name. So if you have a suggestion for a nice name, Top Review Award in PETS 2022, then this is one way of trying to get people who do a lot, who really put in the extra effort to also get their recognition. All right, and I think take it with a grain of salt if your name is not on here, because we have a question there. Because it might just mean that there was not enough feedback.
So this is more of a comment rather than a question. I participated in reviewing for ICLR this year, so it's like a machine learning conference. One of the really interesting ideas that they had, which I think may potentially alleviate some of the problems with, having bad reviewers, because obviously one solution, what the proposed one was, if the reviewer is, seen as bad, just don't invite them again. But at the same time, as said correctly before, this will inevitably put more pressure on the other reviewers to do more work. So one of the ideas that they've introduced this year, which I think worked brilliantly, is they introduced the so-called junior reviewer. So what they did, they basically paired up a bunch of people who self-nominate to review papers, people who are not necessarily very experienced, people who in their, midway through PhD or started their PhD, and, they want to try to do good work for reviewing, but they're not necessarily experienced enough. If the review that they wrote, so it was between 1 and 2 papers, were of good enough quality, they would get integrated into the main process and then be assigned as, proper review rights. And I'm just wondering if one of the potential solutions to, not having enough good reviewers might come from the similar scheme where you pair up the people who want to review but not necessarily aware how to do it properly with people who are slightly more experienced and, kind of achieving two things at the same time, because you don't put too much pressure on people who've done it before and who, just need to review the review.
I can interrupt you right here. We do this already.
Oh, okay.
And we do it already for a much longer time than ICLR.
Okay.
We have this process of externals for which you can sign up and which we assign reviews. The problem, again, in my opinion, with the current way of our externals are done is that there's no system support. And the size that we currently have, Michelle can correct me, it gets a little... most of the time, and Aaron can also confirm that, I think most of the time, the PC chair spend is on making sure external assignments are valid. And I spent very many weekends reviewing this for the last 2 years of PETS.
Okay, cool. I didn't realize that was a thing, but
Yeah.
fair.
All right. So, the next thing is the self-publishing process. So, PETS will no longer publish with De Gruyter Sciendo on their open access platform starting volume 3 of this year. But will move all of its already published and future papers onto its own website, like the Journal of Machine Learning Research. And publish it by itself. The reason was twofold. One, a price increase by De Gruyter, and another one of unclear contractual clauses that would have put the organization into some unclear situation. And we decided to try to keep the process with the templates, the LaTeX templates and all these things as much for 2022. Michelle is going to talk later a little bit about 2023. I think we're still working on the indexing with DOI, Document Object Identifier, DPLP, Scholar, Google Scholar and others that they pick up on this. And I really, Michelle mentioned it during the opening remarks, really a big thank you to Matt Wright and Ian Goldberg, who have taken on, out of nothing, this huge task of getting this platform and this self-publishing process off the ground, and work with us as the PC chairs, work with our publication chairs, which also put in tremendous hours, and try to get this process off the ground, which is no simple feat. Yes, yes, please. Yeah. So I'm wondering, are there any questions on this self-publishing process? I mean, we're all computer scientists. I think the times of printed books are a little bit over. Okay. All right, the next slide is for Michelle. If she's, yes.
Yes, my lights are even back, so good timing. Okay, yeah, so we also this year introduced a slightly more robust ethics process. So the goal of our process here is to make sure that any ethics issues that come up in papers, and here I'm not really talking about like, plagiarism or something, although that comes up as well, but I'm talking more about if people have concerns about the whether or not the ethics of the research that was conducted in a paper are acceptable in terms of, for example, treatment of human subjects or responsible disclosure of some kind of vulnerability. What we want to do with this process is just make sure that any concerns get flagged and get thoroughly discussed. We're probably not ever going to reach 100% agreement on all of these cases, but what we don't want to have happen, which has, somewhat notably happened in other situations, is for a concern to be raised, somewhere in the 5th paragraph of a review, and then nobody notices it was there, and then the entire issue sort of drops on the floor and it's not discussed. So in order to avoid this, one thing that we did was we added a review field. So every review that a reviewer completes now, they need to let us know whether they have no concern about ethical issues. And then if they do have a concern, we sort of have this split into 2 categories. One is there's a concern, but it's primarily that something was not specified. So they didn't put in how much they paid their participants, so we can't judge whether it was a fair compensation or not, right? And then a slightly stronger category of an explicit concern, not just that information is missing, but that something that was discussed in the paper trips an ethics flag of some kind. And we asked the reviewers to explain why. For 2022, these fields were hidden from the authors in order to allow the reviewers to, speak more freely. But what we find was that resulted in sometimes authors not realizing if the concerns were like not repeated in the author visible fields, not realizing what the concern was. So for this year, we decided to make it more directly visible to the authors, so they'll be able to respond to these during the rebuttal phase. And then if these concerns, so if any of these concerns were not, resolved quickly, so for example, we just supplied the missing information in the rebuttal and it was fine, great. But if we had any stronger concerns or things that couldn't be immediately resolved, we assigned 1 or more additional ethics reviewers from a volunteer committee, which was drawn primarily from the PC itself and occasionally experts. And we asked them to take another review specifically focusing on ethics. And then we discussed the problem with among the reviewers, the senior PC member, and the chairs until we reached a conclusion. And in 2022, we did not have any problems that were so serious as to merit rejecting a paper on an ethics basis. So we were able to obtain, so in some cases papers were, already not being accepted, and in other cases, we were able to obtain enough information to resolve the issue. Do you want to go to the next slide? So just as an example, for issue number 4, we had 22 papers that received at least 1 ethics flag from some reviewer. Most of these, the vast majority of cases, this was true in all the issues, were missing information about human subjects research in terms of how people were recruited, how they were compensated, how their data was kept confidential. And there were the second most popular, although significantly less frequent was issues around disclosure of some kind of vulnerabilities. Of those 22, 4 received the more serious flag, which was not just missing information. 2 of these were related to disclosure, 2 were related to human subjects. And 2 of those papers did end up being accepted after longer discussions with the authors, and in some cases, for example, asking the authors during the shepherding process to do extra disclosure work, which we consider to be sufficient to resolve the concerns. So I felt like the process, you know, obviously, right, if we miss it, false negatives are hard to find, right? So if we miss something, I guess I'll find out pretty soon, now that all the papers are public. But as far as I know so far, I think the process worked fairly well in terms of resulting in lots of discussion about these issues and resulting in many papers for revised versions putting in a lot more detail about how they handled ethical questions, which is, I think, great for the community because it disseminates knowledge of how to do these things and allows us to judge the research more effectively. Questions, comments about this stuff?
Sorry, I stepped out for a minute, so you may have addressed this before I walked in, but is there an ethical framework upon which you're making judgment? I'm really suspicious of people claiming to do ethics without talking about either like a deontological set of rules, or is it like consequentialism, or like, so what are you basing an ethics problem on?
I think I think we're basing this primarily on things like the memo report and some other similar principles. So things around minimizing harm, not eliminating harm, but minimizing harm, and considering sort of the trade-offs between benefits and potential harms of the research, as well as considering, you know, what other options would have been available to the researchers and the decisions they made in that sense.
Are there any other questions for Michelle? All right, thanks, Michelle. We're going to move on now. I'm going to talk a bit about the Artifact Committee from this year. For those who don't know, 3 years ago, PETS introduced the artifact review process. So papers accepted to PETS would then receive an invitation to submit an artifact associated with their paper. And since then, this has continued to grow and new issues keep coming up, or new bonuses. And I'm going to talk about those in a bit, but first I'm going to show you the numbers so you have a bit of an idea on the scale and impact these issues had in terms of the quantity. So this year we had 51 artifacts submitted in total. When you compare that to 500 papers submitted, that's much less incoming for us. It's only for accepted papers that can submit an artifact. And so out of 128, we have 51 that submitted artifacts, which is pretty good and a continuing increase, because the previous year we had 34 submissions to the artifact review. So far we have 36 artifacts that have been accepted, and those are every single artifact that was submitted in either rounds 1, 2, or 3 has been accepted, and there's 15 still being reviewed from round 4, and that's just kind of a timeline thing, and we'll talk about that in a bit more. Similar to PETS, we have different numbers of submissions for each issue. We continue to see a drop in issue 2 for the number of submissions. Maybe people just publish more theorems in issue 2, I don't know. And a large increase in the number of artifacts in issue 4, with the most out of all of the issues. So for artifact review, this year we had an artifact committee of 24 reviewers, which at the start of the year we thought was great. We were almost doubled from last year. And each artifact was assigned 2 reviews, and reviewers received at most 3 artifacts per round, which is up from the previous year where we would receive at most 2, but we simply just had too many artifacts. Artifact review is single blind, so the reviewers are anonymous, but because the papers are already accepted, we kind of know whose they are, so it's not possible to be double blind. And artifacts consist of scripts, source code, and data sets, though primarily it's scripts and source code, and frequently include either a VM or a Docker image. This year, we had some artifacts that had some major hardware requirements, and this limited reproducibility. So this included things related to Raspberry Pis or webcams, as well as iPhones, and in one case, a satellite dish, I think one reviewer said. So this has introduced some new things to consider going into this next year for artifact review. One was considering introducing artifacts available versus artifacts verified or reproducible. And then the other possibility being to pool for external reviewers for artifacts, specifically when we need this specialized hardware. And one of the ways we thought that this might be possible is if we reached out to the regular PETS committee and saw who had this hardware already as part of their own research. A lot of the reviewers on the artifact committee are more junior researchers and don't necessarily have hardware, especially if it's not for their own research. It's not in the budget to just kind of acquire for a one-off review. Here's the fun one. So artifact review and timelines. Previously, the main goal with artifact review is to just kind of continue to improve reproducibility and accessibility of research coming out of the PETS community. But this year, artifact review was able and did find some issues with some papers. So whether it was a mistake in something that was set up in the paper or that we found in the artifact that affected the results or how they reported it, it was identified, which is great because now the authors had the opportunity to address these issues, and in each case they did so. But infrastructure was incredibly strained, and I'm very, very sorry, publication chairs. We did not predict this. But you can see the timeline on the bottom there. Papers get accepted. At that point, you get an invitation to submit an artifact. The artifact deadline is the same deadline as the camera ready, the final version. And then weeks later, because we've got to give people time to review, we'll now be aware of these potential issues. So at least 2 weeks after the final version of the paper, we are finding a problem that now we have to see how the authors are going to address it, and then how are we going to fit it into the remaining publication process. Fortunately, none of these were found in round 4, or we would have been doomed. But it's still something that we need to consider going forward in terms of changing the timelines and how we want artifact review to work in cooperation with PETS publication. Any questions about artifact review or on potential paths for this new development that we've had?
Well, I was just wondering if there was a reason for placing the artifact deadline so late, because it was kind of expected that you would end up with results after the papers were final.
So artifact review is in part only for accepted papers, and part of that is doing a thorough artifact review already takes a lot of time because you're going through all the code and documentation that someone submitted. So to do it before the paper has been accepted means we're now looking at that pool of 500 papers potentially rather than 120 max.
No, but if I'm looking at your slide, you say paper accepted, then artifact call, and then camera ready and artifact deadline. I'm not sure if these two were the same because we submitted an artifact. I'm not sure they were the same, but at least I would have done artifact call, paper accepted together with the artifact deadline. As soon as you can start preparing the artifact. I mean, most likely, if you have a paper that you're confident will be accepted, or that you hope will be accepted, you will have an artifact. And then, if the paper is accepted, you submit it a few days later, and that will help you provide reviews more quickly.
I'm assuming the authors already have the artifacts affiliated with their papers. But there's a difference between, in many cases, perhaps the final product that was sufficient to make your results for you and having them be in any way reproducible or accessible to a different person on a different infrastructure. So it's more of an awareness that there's this additional time that authors may need. While I would love to think all authors have the time and are willing to put it into prepare
No, but
their
I think, for example, on taking our example, because we did have an artifact, but now I don't remember exactly when we learned about the artifact, but it was very, very late and certainly very close to when we did not know about the artifact when we submitted a paper. And had we known that, it's not had we known that if we wanted to submit an artifact, we would have had to do like 3 days after the acceptance of the paper, then we would have prepared the artifact earlier.
So I think the call for artifacts is on the webpage, right?
Yeah, as Florian said, the call for artifacts is on the PET's webpage. It's not like when you submit your paper in HotCrap, but on the call for papers, lower on there is also the call for artifacts. You just get an invitation to submit after your paper has been accepted. But the call is there.
There's a question.
I have a question.
So who first?
Ian, go ahead, I guess, and then we have one in person.
Sure, thanks. So I want to note that CCS this year made a change where you submit your artifact at the same time as you submit your paper. Now, I don't want Bailey and the team to review those artifacts before the paper is accepted. But if the artifact is sitting there or a link to it in HotCrap or something, then the moment the paper is accepted, the team can start reviewing the accepted paper's artifacts. The downside of that is that it takes a little bit extra annoying work to submit an anonymized artifact, but I mean, we had to do that for CCS. And it's not impossible. If we just require the authors to submit an anonymized artifact at submission time, then we can save this a couple of weeks in the timeline here.
I wonder if it would help to, like, what if we made the artifact submission happen sometime after rebuttals, but before final decisions come out?
Yeah.
Because then if you don't think your paper has a shot,
Oh, sure, yeah.
also, like Ian mentioned, things are a little hectic at the paper deadline often anyway. Many of us maybe wish we were better about that, but it just sort of, and as Roger mentioned, like the artifact cleanup and the camera ready happening at the same, having multiple things happening at one time makes things hard.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's enough time in between the rebuttals and the notifications for that to work.
No, that's a great idea. If you make the artifact deadline like even a day or two after the paper acceptance, then anyone who gets a interim reviews that look promising, they can start getting their artifact together and then just push the button when it gets accepted.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, even if you had it due like around right after the rebuttal period, like you wouldn't have to necessarily anonymize it if no one's going to look at it until after it's accepted anyway. Right? I mean,
Right, exactly. No, so that's a better idea than what I said, for sure. Yeah, that solves both problems. Just make the artifact deadline the day after the paper acceptance notification, but make no other changes. But everyone needs obviously to be aware this is happening. One trick is that, so we got bit by this in Usenix security a little while ago. for shepherded or major revision, not major revision. So in Pet's case, it would be for shepherded papers. It turned out the artifact deadline was before the shepherding deadline. So you didn't actually know that your paper was accepted until after the artifact deadline. And that actually surprised and bit us, but they allowed us to submit the artifact for the next artifact deadline. So something.
I think we still have, Florian still has some more slides here, though I don't know who has to present them, and we're coming near the end of the time, so I think we need to move on.
I actually had something that I wanted to add. Right?
Please
so
go
what
ahead.
I was going to say is when we started the artifact, we did originally made an assumption about what timeline would be good, and I think it would be reasonable to reassess that timeline now. I'll also say that a lot of the artifacts require several back and forth rounds. So if people have artifacts that they don't think are ready quite yet, it's probably fine for them to submit them as long as they are continuing to work on them in the background. And that actually works really well with how the artifact workflow usually goes. So, I mean, I've seen a couple of people make comments here in the online space saying that they feel like their artifact is quite ready. That might actually be okay. That's all I wanted to say.
So everyone should know that Cecilia was the one who actually introduced the artifact process. So she's responsible for all the problems we're having right now. But I think we're all very grateful. Michelle, I think this is your slide. I hope the power is on. Please.
Yeah, so Florian left me a slide of what's new in 2023. And the answer is definitely not as many things as were new in 2022. I think this is more of a adjusting to some of the things that were new in 2022. So one big thing is that we did switch from the Siendo template to the ACN template, which we hope is going to make life easier for everybody now that we are self-published. And we're still working out some additional adjustments to the self-publishing process. So we should hopefully have a new licensing agreement with a new and less restrictive Creative Commons license that should be ready pretty soon. We are also discussing how to take advantage of the self-publishing process to try to make life somewhat less painful for our publication chairs who have to do a lot of work sort of reformatting everybody's papers and rebuilding the LaTeX, which is terrible. So we're sort of experimenting a little bit with that. I don't think we're going to nail that process on the first try, but we will. Being independent allows us to continue experimenting with that a little bit. And just continuing to evolve things we talked about already today, the ethics process, the senior PC. I hope based on our experience last year, we were able to give clearer instructions and a better sense of the scope of the senior job to our senior PC members this time around, and also continuing to think about the review feedback process and how we're going to continue to handle those kinds of things. So I think nothing dramatically new, but hoping to iterate on some of these things we've already talked about today.
All right, thank you, Michelle. We are actually done. We're actually a little bit over time, but I want to open it for open questions from the floor because this is supposed to be interactive. If there's anything that has not been covered that you want to raise, your opportunity is now or later in the coffee break. If not, yeah, there is one, okay.
Yeah, so we talked almost entirely about the conference proceeding side of things, but there's also the actual in-person or virtual hybrid thing. So if you have opinions on being here in person, or if you, the cyber people, have opinions on being there not in person, please let us know. It'd be great to have a town hall about exactly that. I mean, one of the things I was thinking some days ago, in the workshop model, it used to be that you look at who's attending the conference and you pull your speakers from that. And the workshops this year didn't all work that way, and there are trade-offs. But we're out of time, so I'll hand it back to Florian.
Thank you. That is indeed the big open question, is hybrid or in person, and what all your experiences are here. So let anyone like Bali or anyone else from the PET board know, and hopefully we can do something about this. Other than that, I want to say thank you and enjoy the coffee break.